Wow, it's been a while. But welcome, welcome to Three and a Half Podcast. Welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's an honor for me that you tune in and listen and get this knowledge. Um, I mean, think of me like a bridge for those who know nothing or feel that they know very little and they want to know something and don't know where to turn, don't know how to get started. I like to think of myself as a jump start. I do know a lot, I read a lot, but I am not an expert in a lot of the things I'm talking about. I know a lot more than the average person, but I mostly want to get the experts' voices that I'm listening to out there because their voices are suppressed. I mostly want to bring balance. I want to bring information that is suppressed, that is not well known but should be known, out to the world. And I hope that I'm doing that. And regardless, I'm going to do my best. So once again, welcome. Welcome to Three and a Half Podcast. I'm your host, Sierra Bell. And let's get this party started. I'm going to be talking about debt today. Debt and how it's used to control, and how this is an ancient problem as well as a modern one. And it's one of the main mechanisms for how oligarchs control populations and put populations into debt bondage or slavery, which debt bondage is just another form of slavery. So, yeah, let's do this. I like to read from books when I'm giving out this information, and then I'll try to elaborate on it because, again, I want to be a conduit that directs your attention to certain authors or thought leaders on a lot of these subjects, because although I know a lot because of certain people that I listen to. And I think that those people's voices should be heard, including my own, including everyone's voices should be heard, really. And that's another episode that I want to do about censorship, because I think it's important for as many voices as possible to be heard. I think the problem we have is suppression of information, not too much information. It's too much of one kind of information. It's too much propaganda and not enough of balanced playing field, because the truth will be seen by the collective if the truth is able to come out there and have an equal footing in the fight. So, but that's another episode. I'm going to read some pages from the New Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. And I suggest everyone read this one or his other one, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, the first one he wrote. This one it adds on to his previous one. So I'm just going to read some pages and then discuss what was read. And he was an economic hitman. And actually, he explains what an economic hitman is in the very beginning. Okay. Economic hitmen, or EHMs, are highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that has taken on new and terrifying dimensions during the time of globalization. I should know. I was an EHM. So, summary, economic hitman. They are used to swindle money out of countries and into the hand of U.S. commercial interests or corporations, multinational corporations, really. They don't have loyalty to one nation. This next piece is describing someone who was assigned to him by the intelligence community. Her name was Claudine, and she was his trainer for becoming an economic hitman. Claudine pulled no punches when describing what I would be called upon to do. My job, she said, was to encourage world leaders to become part of a vast network that promotes U.S. commercial interests. In the end, those leaders become ensnared in a web of debt that ensures their loyalty. We can draw on them whenever we desire to satisfy our political, economic, or military needs. In turn, they bolster their political positions by bringing industrial parks, power plants, and airports to their people. The owners of U.S. engineering and construction companies become fabulously wealthy. If we falter, a more malicious form of hitman, the jackal, would step to the plate. And if the jackals failed, then the job fell to the military. So to sum that up, what he was trained to do was go from world leader to world leader and tell them to sign up for this economic plan. The U.S. will make that world leader and their family wealthy, but their people will suffer. And if they don't play the game, they will be turned over to the jackal. And the jackal usually means they'll be assassinated. They'll be assassinated or they'll be overthrown. And they'll be overthrown by usually the CIA creating a movement against them in their country. So that's many different forms. The Management of Savagery by Max Blumenthal talks about this. This is actually about how America's national security state fueled the rise of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Donald Trump. So Al-Qaeda and ISIS are two examples of the United States. The United States created Al-Qaeda and ISIS using the method of funding, training, propping up radical extremists around the world to overthrow governments. And so that's what jackals do. Now, if the jackals don't succeed, then the military, just straight up military intervention. But that is a last resort. Okay, the empire would like to continue as I shouldn't say non-violently as possible, but in a way, they would like their exploitation to be not so messy because it's hard to maintain that type of violence. But if it's necessary, they'll do it. When I first entered those ranks, EHM, I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. South Vietnam had fallen to the communist north, and now the world was threatened by the Soviet Union and China. My business, that's a whole another episode in and of itself, this fear of communism. Communism was the resistance to fascism during the time of the Nazis. So there's propaganda around that. A lot of people don't even know what communism is, and that is because of all of this propaganda about it. But that's another episode. Let's continue. My business school professors had taught that Financing infrastructure projects through mountains of World Bank debt would pull economically developing nations out of poverty and save them from the clutches of communism. Experts at the World Bank and USAID reinforced this mindset. By the time I discovered the falsehoods in that story, I felt trapped by the system. I had grown up I had grown up feeling poor in my New Hampshire boarding school, but suddenly I was making a great deal of money, traveling first class to countries I dreamt about all my life, staying in the best hotels, eating in the finest restaurants, and meeting with heads of state. I had it made. How could I even consider getting out? Then the nightmares began. I woke up in dark hotel rooms sweating, haunted by images of sights I had actually seen. Legless lepers, strapped into wooden boxes on wheels, rolling along the streets of Jakarta. Men and women bathing in slime green canals while next to them others defecated. A human cadaver abandoned on a garbage heap, swarming with maggots and flies, and children who slept in cardboard boxes, vying with roaming packs of dogs for scraps of rubbish. I realized that I'd distanced myself emotionally from these things. That reminds me of the book Skin in the Game. Um, Skin in the Game essentially is about those who make decisions that are risky and do not share in the consequence of those decisions, specifically the harm. They do not have skin in the game. Those who have skin in the game are those who are affected by decisions, uh, specifically the harm of decisions. And so those who will be affected by the harm of decisions are more trustworthy in making those decisions because they have skin in the game. That is just a super brief overview of that. I will be talking more about skin in the game, but not quite right now. But it comes up, the ideology comes up constantly. And this is an example. I had realized I distanced myself emotionally from these things. When you distance yourself from these consequences, you are able to do barbaric and unethical things. Let's continue. Like other Americans, I'd seen these people as less than human. They were beggars, misfits, them. One day my Indonesian government limo stopped at a traffic light. A leopard thrust the gory remnants of a hand through my window. My driver yelled at him. The leopard grinned, a lopsided, toothless smile, and withdrew. We drove on, but his spirit remained with me. It was as though he had sought me out. His bloody stump was a warning, his smile a message. Reform, he seemed to say. Repent. Now, he felt this way because he realized what he was doing around the world. He realized that he was a part of the system. He was one of the cogs in the system that perpetuated that man's social turmoil, that man's social degradation. And so when we think of these countries, and I've heard, Americans, U.S. Americans that have gone to other countries and have said, man, they're so poor there. They all these horrible stories about what's going on with the poverty in other countries and what people are desperately trying to do to get out of it, and but unbeknownst to them, not realizing how our country has contributed to their situation, how people like John Perkins contributed to their situation, how U.S. Americans are benefiting on the exploitation of those people. They are most likely they are in their situation because our country has manipulated the their country, has manipulated the course of their country. And this is him realizing that. Let's continue. I began to look more closely at the world around me and at myself. I came to understand that although I had all the trappings of success, I was miserable. I had been popping Valium every night and drinking lots of alcohol. I'd get up in the morning, force coffee and pep pills into my system, and stagger off to negotiate contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That life had come to seem normal to me. I had bought into the stories. I was taking on debt to support my lifestyle. I was operating out of fear, the fear of communism, losing my job, failure, and not having the material things everyone once told me I needed. One night I woke up with the memory of a different type of dream. I had walked into the office of a leader in a country that had just discovered it had lots of oil. Our construction companies, I told him, will rent equipment from your brother's John Deere franchise. We'll pay twice the going rate. Your brother can share his profits with you. In the dream, I went on to explain that we'd make similar deals with friends of his who owned Coca-Cola bottling plants, other food and beverage suppliers, and labor contractors. All he has to do was sign off on a World Bank loan that would hire U.S. corporations to build infrastructure projects in his country. Then I casually mentioned that a refusal would bring in the jackals. Remember, I said, what happened to... I rattled off a list of names like Mossadegh of Iran, Arbenz of Guatemala, Allende of Chile, Lumumba of Congo, Diem of Vietnam. All of them, I said, were overthrown, or I ran a finger across my throat, because they didn't play our game. I lay there in bed, once again in a cold sweat, realizing that this dream described my reality. I had done all that. So this happened. They just ran off names from different countries. Iran, Guatemala, Allende of Chile, Lumumba of the Congo, Vietnam. These are just some of the countries. That's not even all. We've gone from Iran, Vietnam, Congo, Chile. We've reached multiple continents. And that's not even all the countries. And in each one of these, they were overthrown or killed because they didn't play our game. And that is how the world works. This is how the U.S. empire functions. That is your reality. And it's important for us to know, for international solidarity. Around the world, people are fighting the same fight as us domestically, if not worse. And U.S. Americans are in the belly of the beast. It's most important that we understand, because it's our country with the forceful hand in all of this. It had been easy for me to provide government officials like the one in my dream with impressive materials that they could use to justify the loans to their people. My staff of economists, financial experts, statisticians, and mathematicians was skilled at developing sophisticated econometric models that proved that such investments in electric power systems, highways, ports, airports, and industrial parks would spur economic growth. For years, I also had relied on those models to convince myself that my actions were beneficial. I had justified my job by the fact that gross domestic product, GDP, did increase after the infrastructure was built. Now I came to face the facts of the story behind the mathematics. The statistics were highly biased. They were skewed to the fortunes of the families that owned the industries, banks, shopping malls, supermarkets, hotels, and a variety of other businesses that prospered from the infrastructure we built. They prospered. Everyone else suffered. And that is, again, the story from country to country from country. When you think about poverty in other countries, in any country, ask yourself this question: what happened? Did we have anything to do with it? Is their story this story? It probably is. Money that had been budgeted for healthcare, education, and other social services was diverted to pay interest on the loans. In the end, the principal was never paid down. The country was shackled by debt. Then, International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund hitmen arrived and demanded that the government offer its oil or other resources to our corporations at cut-rate prices, and that the country privatize its electric, water, sewer, and other public sector institutions and sell them to the corporatocracy. Big business was the big winner. So the IMF hitmen come in and say, you can't pay your debt. Mind you, that was planned. These loans are intentionally too big to pay. You can't pay your loan, so give me something. I'm here for my pound of flesh. In every case, a key condition of such loans was that the projects would be built by our engineering and construction companies. Most of the money never left the United States. So the loan never actually left the United States. The money we're lending didn't actually leave the United States. It simply was transferred from banking offices in Washington to engineering offices in New York, Houston, or San Francisco. We EHMs also made sure that the recipient country agreed to buy airplanes, medicines, tractors, computer technologies, and other goods and services from our corporations. Despite the fact that the money was returned almost immediately to the corporate members of the corporatocracy, the recipient country, the debtor, was required to pay it all back, principal plus interest. I forgot about this next sentence. If an EHM was completely successful, the loans were so large that the debtor was forced to default on his payments after a few years. When this happened, we EHMs, like the mafia, demanded our pound of flesh. This often included one or more of the following: control over United Nations votes, the installation of military bases, which is why the U.S. has about 1,000 military bases around the world, or access to precious resources such as oil. Of course, the debtor still owed us the money, and another country was added to our global empire. We're just collecting countries like Pokemon cards, okay? If you've heard the phrase client state, that's what that means. A client state is a state that is heavily influenced by the United States. And this is usually how we've gotten that influence. Claudine and I openly discussed the deceptive nature of GNP. For instance, GNP may show growth even when it profits only one person, such as an individual who owns a utility company, and even if the majority of the population is burdened with debt. The rich get richer and the poor grow poorer. Yet, from a statistical standpoint, this is recorded as economic progress. Like U.S. citizens in general, most Maine employees believed we were doing countries favors when we built power plants, highways, and ports. Our schools and our press have taught us to perceive all of our actions as altruistic. Over the years, I've repeatedly heard comments like, if they're going to burn the U.S. flag and demonstrate against our embassy, why don't we just get out of their damn country and let them wallow in their own poverty? I now know that people who say such things often hold diplomas certifying that they are well educated. However, these people have no clue that the main reason we establish embassies around the world is to serve our own interests, which during the last half of the 20th century meant creating history's first truly global empire, a corporate empire supported and driven by the U.S. government. Despite their credentials, such people are as uneducated as those 18th century colonists who believed that the Indians fighting to defend their lands were servants of the devil. Oof. Oof. They are clueless to the mechanisms of global empire, of U.S. global empire, and the impact that we have on that country. And these are educated people. I understand that. I speak with college educated people 50 years old to 20 something years old and everything in between, and I hear the same things. People who, are well learned, who've traveled across the world, and they'll talk about how horrible this country is, and I'm so glad I'm in the United States because it's shitty over there, and and completely clueless. And these are supposed to be our most educated. But like Noam Chomsky has said, and oh my gosh, what is that phrase? I have a whole song I made so that I didn't forget. I have the Osmosis app. Manufacturing consent. Oh my gosh. Disappointed in myself.
Manufacturing consent. Manufacturing consent. Manufacturing consent. Manufacturing consent.
Whose consent is being manufactured?
Political class, relatively educated, articulate, plays some kind of role in decision-making, managers, teachers, writers, and so on. They're supposed to vote. They're supposed to play some role in the way economic and political and cultural life goes on. Their consent is crucial. One group that has to be deeply indoctrinated.
Manufacturing consent.
Okay, so these people are educated, right? And we think that if you have a college degree, if you're a professor, if you are a doctor, a lawyer, you are supposed to be our highest intellectuals. You're supposed to know everything, or at least know what's important to lead us to liberation, right? If there is a liberation movement, you would be one of the ones that were smart enough to figure it all out, or smart enough to understand societies. Well, these same people are victims of the manufacturing of consent machine that Noam Chomsky has pointed out. How propaganda in the United States is geared towards that class of people, the intellectuals, the college educated, those who manage our political system, those who manage our workplaces. So our managers, our teachers, these are the people who are most propagandized because they lead others. They teach others, they educate others, and they have this self-righteousness to feel that they are the ones that should teach others. But in many cases, they are some of the most uneducated. I will end with this being an ancient problem, and also something that was put into the Bible, the issue with debt. This book is called And Forgive Them Their Debts, which is a part of the Lord's Prayer, actually. Lending, Foreclosure, and Redemption from Bronze Age Finance to the Jubilee Year by Michael Hudson. Michael Hudson, definitely check him out. Very important economist. Very, very important. He worked for the UN and specialized in debt around the world. He worked as a Wall Street analyst, just very knowledgeable. This book, he worked with someone at Harvard Peabody Museum, and Harvard Peabody Museum is one of the most prolific museums in the world, or at least the nation. So check him out. Check him out. And I'm just going to try and do an overview of this because I can come back to this book over and over again. Well, I'll say that debt cancellation was major in the Bronze Age up to the time of Jesus. Babylonia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, even Rome, all of these places practiced debt cancellation. And it was practical. Debt cancellation made sure that society didn't fall apart. It was essential that citizens were able to support themselves and not be slaves because they worked on public infrastructure. They needed the citizens to be well enough to do public infrastructure, to be willing and able to be in the military, and to make sure society did not degrade socially, because when that happened, usually the society would blow up. It would dismantle. It would collapse. And when that happened, another nation would be able to come in and overthrow the society or overthrow the ruler, or it was dangerous to have a society in the state of collapse. And so for various reasons, debt cancellation was common. So important it was that it was placed into the Bible. So the Jubilee year, if anyone's heard of the Jubilee year, that was a system for debt cancellation. Every 50 years, canceled everyone's debts, clean slate. I suggest learning more from this guy. I'm trying my best to explain. I'm still learning. So, again, I'm here to give voices to these people. I'm here to give voices, and have information that is suppressed be known. My voice is important. Everyone's voice is important, but I'm here to show you guys these are the experts, and check them out. I'm going to do my best to remember to add names to the end of these videos that suggest, if you want to learn more, follow these people on Twitter, on social media, check out their YouTube channels, just everything, so that you can passively absorb this information just like we passively absorb a bullshit all day. This stuff should be common knowledge to people. You know what I mean? It's not that it's difficult to understand this information, it's that it's difficult to find this information because it's hidden, because it's suppressed, because we're propagandized for all of our life. If we had this information, given to us on TV, even TV propagandizes us and perpetuates ideas that suppress and exploit people. If information was passively given to us all the time through TV and other entertainment and whatever in school, we would be set. We wouldn't be saying it's so hard to understand and know all this information, because we'd be given this information all of the time. Just like we're giving junk and bullshit information all the time. All we know is junk and bullshit. We know junk and bullshit like the back of our hands, but we don't know the information we should actually know because it's not fed to us constantly. The truth is not given to us constantly like bullshit is given to us constantly. So anyway, a major task of Babylonian and other Mesopotamian rulers upon taking the throne was to restore economic balance by canceling agrarian personal debts, liberating bond servants, and reversing land forfeitures for citizens holding self-support land. So this was a major task. This was routine for rulers to come to power from the Bronze Age to the time of Jesus. This has been a thing. Debt cancellations were not radical, nor were they reforms. They were the traditional means to prevent widespread debt bondage and land foreclosures. Bronze Age rulers enabled economic relations to start afresh and in financial balance upon taking the throne, and when needed at times of crop failure or economic distress. There was no faith in inherent automatic tendencies, what today is called market equilibrium, to ensure economic growth. So really there was no faith in neoliberalism. They didn't use the term neoliberalism, but throwing everything in the market was not trusted. Rulers recognized that if they let debt arrears mount up, their societies would veer out of balance, creating an oligarchy that would impoverish the citizen army and drive populations to flee the land. So this was a practical thing. Even if you weren't like this super benevolent being, you did this. You canceled debts because it was just best for your position of power. Rulers were pretty much fighting for power against oligarchs. Oligarchs have no loyalty to nations. Without clean slates, creditor oligarchies appropriated most of the land and reduced much of the population to bondage. Creditors translated their economic gains into political power, casting off the fiscal obligations that originally were attached to land tenure rights. The burden of debt and its mounting interest charges led to the foreclosure of land as the basic means of self-support, and hence the loss of the debtor's liberty. Archaic traditions of restoring order, originally legally enforceable, were given an otherworldly eschatological meaning as the social order collapsed under the burden of debt. Losing hope for secular revival, antiquity felt itself to be living in the end time. So, when the traditional means for restoring order, such as canceling debts, were not happening, it felt like living in the end times. It's that serious because debt was you turning over your body, your sister, your land, your means of being, your freedom, your literal freedom was turned over when you were trying to pay debts that were too big. Ancient problem, biblical problem, modern problem. And there's going to be multiple episodes about debt because the story goes on and on and on. And we have to be alert. We have to be aware. Okay, I just read Animal Farm, and one of the key points is if there is a revolution and the population is not alert, if the population is not educated, and I don't mean college educated, I mean if the population is not educated on their reality, of what is real, of the mechanisms of how the reality works, then they will fall into the same situation they started out in. They will only come full circle and end up right back where they started. So that's why this is so important. That's why understanding all of this is so important. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I need to find a catchy like slogan to say at the end or something, but for now I'll say I'm still learning, and I hope that I was able to give you important and valuable information. Thank you.